climate, food, and economic data so you can make informed decisions as we shift into a new era. Here's what was, this is what's coming. Our world is never going back to 2019, so what will the new era look like? And most importantly, what is immediate that will affect the pocketbook and the outlook into next year so we can all get ready? Thank you for joining. I'm your host, David DuByne. Right along here with Ransom Godwin, bringing you through 2 hours of the madness of our world and how to survive, thrive, prosper, and get ready for the changes so you can help others. Well, the Houthis are back at it again. Hyperinflation raging around the world. You can see the weather changing. The planets are lined up. Gas giants forming their square. The floods suddenly start. Biblical rivers from the sky across all planet. And locations across the planet are flooding. Rivers from the sky. More to be expected of that as we continue. And there's just a lot of strangeness. And I think I hear a coyote out where my geese are because they're usually not very this active at night. I'll have to look. Put a spotlight out there while Ransom takes us through a minute. But what are you doing to prepare? Have you noticed the vibrational, I guess, energy in the air is also changing? Looking at the KP index, I mean, you can definitely see there are some spikes, but in the last, say, 15 years, lower than the last 80. So it does seem we're trending down to this solar activity thing, which would explain a lot of crop losses. The mega freeze across Europe, I experienced that when I was in Hungary a few days back. I just got back to the States a couple days ago, like literally 2 days ago. But we got to experience an incredibly warm spring, and then it froze, and we had to put our winter clothing back on as all of the blooms and all of the flowered plants and all of the fruit production is pretty much lost across Central and Eastern Europe. And I could talk about a little bit of food inflation and what happened going to Japan with the devalued currency, Croatia doubling prices, Hungary 40% food inflation in just a few months. I mean, it's hitting everywhere else across the planet, so it's just going to be a matter of time before it arrives here. So, Ransom, I need to check on the coyotes, man, and I'm glad you're joining me here. Let me get a quick peek outside while you bring us into the world of today. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you. I was just kind of trying to ignore the news since last week. I mean, it's always war this, war that, and how they're going to restrict freedoms here or there. And, they passed that big FISA Act through. So they're running out of the kind of cards that surprise people. And I'm just waiting for the drop of the big message that we're not alone in the universe. Because I think, for at least a decade now, they've been prepper. That's the biggest, I think I would call it a, predictive programming message that is in all of entertainment. And now it's across the, jumped the shark into the headlines where they're constantly talking about it at the same time as trying to debunk old ones. It's weird that they're pushing the idea. And I think what they're going to do is give us all some bacterium or some kind of other life that they find on Mars very soon. Something probably they already know exists, but I think that's the card that we're all really waiting for. The news that extraterrestrial life is a reality. And then, let the mind games begin. If you think the mind games are bad right now, which they are, I mean, because you can watch television and you would think that certain things are going on in certain places. And if you don't know someone or have a line on getting video or messages from that area, that, could or couldn't be happening. We have no idea at this point. And with the revelations of technology, we now know everything we see, hear, and read about could be fake, could be wrong. I'm sure that everybody's seen the new versions of AI video out there. So literally anybody in the world could be just picked out, and the mainstream media could say that this is reality or that's reality and instantly destroy anyone with a little bit of fake audio, and some fake video. The AI is so good now, and I'm sure some of the really, really rich people and people that have access to the better technologies are looking at stuff now that you could just write a paragraph, name where it's supposed to be, who's supposed to be in it, and it will present that exact reality to you. So we literally are at that point where you cannot now believe anything you see, hear, or read. And with the, if you really want to get into it, the technology that I talked about last week that can literally read your mind. There's different forms of it. There's machines that can, read your thoughts literally and make a text type out on a screen. And I'm not talking about, connecting wires to your head. I'm talking about non-invasive, meaning that they could just scan your head and know what you're talking about, which puts a new aspect on everything. So it's no surprise to me that the government here, at least in the United States, agreed with their new rules of spying, which is basically no rules at all. They can spy on just about anybody at any time for any reason. And now technology could start to be integrated, if it hasn't already been, with the devices that we use that can use that same technology to scan you and know what you're thinking about, know how you feel, know what your wants are, your needs. And this puts humans in a very precarious place where we can be manipulated like no other time in history. They have machines that can make you feel different, literally, emotionally. And this is way past, conversations about flicker rates and color tones and sounds that they put into movies to make you feel a certain way, to bring out fake emotions so that they drain you of those. What we're talking about is sophisticated technology that can actually just scan your brain and reveal the secrets. And companies and countries around the world are going to start using this for espionage purposes and other things. There will be no secret that you can hide from the system. And what's really weird about it is if you think about the aspect of how these things develop, if they have a machine somewhere in a building that can scan your head and tell what you're saying, that means that they could do the same thing remotely. And, say you and somebody thought that you had gotten rid of all the devices and you were in the private. Guess what? Not really. They can get a little type out of what you're reading, possible. I'm saying possible. This is just, an educated guess on where this technology is going. It will be used to know what everyone knows. There will be no more secrets. So just think about how you can use this in combination with other stuff. You can know exactly what people are up to. And it puts a new spin on the surveillance and security states of the world. How much do they know? How much do they let happen on purpose? And, when people realize that possibly, if we possibly start to realize in a mass movement that this is actually happening and it's not science fiction, and that your food, your air, your medicines, and even your mind are being altered, swayed, distracted, and manipulated, they might wake up and be angry about that. So, they have this last card that they can pull out, and they're putting out that predictive programming. And I mean, everywhere, not only a multi-dimensional existence. If you've noticed that every mainstream Hollywood blockbuster series of any characters or old franchises of movies have now gone on the script of that there are interdimensional beings that can come here. We can go there. There are different versions of you and all of these other things. It all sounds like sci-fi. It's all in the movies, but yet I think they're really to, push this idea on human beings. And it may be the way that they distract people at the very end when, things are coming into place with this new reset, or should I say the post-reset world that we are about to start living in, where everything is tracked and traced. Everything is micromanaged. Every opinion you have or past mistake you have is subject to come back and prosecute you, kind of like, the Cultural Revolution and the way that they had their little struggle sessions and dragged people out and had arguments that they couldn't win against a mob of angry people. And we all know how that turned out. The government allowed that to go on because it was just a stepping stone to gather complete totalitarian power. And we see that same thing in the Western world. What's scary is that millions of people from totalitarian regimes that we all know about and are used to for decades. And we get plenty of info on how bad it is in certain places. Those people are leaving. They're coming to the first world, and by the millions. So I think the latest estimate for last year was at least 180 million people, or 180 to 190 million people have relocated to new countries. But when you see where they're leaving from, it's kind of a big, wide span of different places they're leaving from. But the destinations are very small. There's only a couple, and that would be Europe and North America. And they're crowding in there at record numbers. So it's bizarre to see so many people ignorant to the idea that what they're chasing, the freedom of economics, freedom of human rights and civil liberties, the freedom to have what we call here the American dream, might be over. It might be done. And it looks like they're shutting this idea down just in time for the new addition of tens of millions of people to each one of these countries. So what they thought they were escaping totalitarianism, they're moving right back into it. And bizarrely, companies, billionaires and others, are investing in the areas that they're leaving. So it's kind of like some kind of bait and switch on a massive global scale has taken place in order to consolidate the masses so that they're more easily controlled. And that kind of goes back to, what do they have plans for us? They've already shown us, from the technologies of reading your mind to no privacy, to the idea that we no longer need human beings to produce human-like entities that would supply workforces, armies, and other things in only 20 years. And you get this lesson from history, from, the Romans. You can go to World War II, but any one of these locations all run on the same idea. Even the Marxist revolutions, the color revolutions, whatever, you kind of can smush all those together, because what they do is first take control of the youth. They have to have the youth. They have to have the youth's mind. They have to skew the youth to think in bizarre and different ways so that they don't get along with their own civilization, and lead them astray into things that are, detrimental to their survival. But that's what's exactly happening here in the United States and over in Western Europe. You see it every time you see, stop the oil people go out there. And what's so bizarre is the Palestinian, pro-Palestinian movements, just stop oil movements. You can name endless amounts of people, but when you find out who's giving them money and directions, you'll find out it's all the same billionaires and millionaires and mega corporations and NGOs that are directing the people to throw these Marxist revolutions. And they're the ignorant masses that do it and end up giving more power to the people that don't care which way civilization goes, as long as it's destructive. And that's what I'm seeing. And there's just so many distractions. I mean, like week by week, there's a new, they have to incrementalize just a new shock value. And right at the time that people get used to that shock value, they have to up it again. And to the point where we'll all be desensitized when some of the craziest things ever in history start to happen. And I think that's exactly the point we're at right now. And we're about to see some weird stuff. And I have a feeling that this summer is going to be one of the strangest summers ever recorded in the U.S. And I'm not talking about weird weather. I'm talking about weird behavior leading up to our election, because there are some of the craziest legal conversations happening right now, like whether or not a president. See, it's the bait and switch idea. So a lot of people are mad that they're trying to prosecute President Trump. And, maybe rightly so on some of them, because it seems to be a lot of made up lawfare going in this direction. But in the background, they're arguing on whether or not a president could commit a lot of crimes and get away with it. And they're even pointing out the crimes of former presidents, as an example of why you shouldn't prosecute this president. Now, it doesn't matter which side you're on. The bait and switch is in. When you think about it, what they're going to end up doing, in my opinion, is ruling that a president is above prosecution. And therefore, all of the past crimes done by other administrations can forever be overlooked. You'll never have to worry about anybody going to jail. But not only that, future presidents, they're literally arguing, does the president have the right to kill someone that's an American citizen? Maybe one of someone they don't like, and they're putting it in a way that the the Trump people or the right-leaning people would want this to happen so that they could kill their political allies. But in reality, this has already happened under the Obama administration. They already killed American citizens without a trial, without a jury, without any kind of due process, and that already happened. And they even killed relations to that person. I think the guy's name was Anwar al-Awlaki, and they killed him and his kid. Now, I'm not saying the guy was a good guy or he was or wasn't part of any groups. What I am saying is they set precedent to kill American citizens with no trial, no jury, and no due process. So the Constitution was completely removed from that process. And now at the very top levels of our country, they're arguing whether or not the people at the top have the right to kill people whenever they see fit. And they're using examples of past presidents and possibly future presidents. So that's where we're at. It's a really weird time where the governments don't have a problem eradicating those underneath them, because at this point, the people in positions of power now feel like they're a new kind of royalty, and they're acting as such.
The greatest show on earth. Yeah, playing both sides. We're watching the play. Do I have to get a ticket for that one, or is that... Oh, wait, standing room only. My bad. I guess we need a floor seat. I'll tell you one thing. Traveling through Europe, I saw what you're saying again and again and again in the museums with all the paintings going back from the 1400s forward. I got so sick of looking at war scene after war scene. And when I say that, it was one king was battling another. The Ottoman Empire was up there. Somebody was coming down from a different area. It was just all I looked at in museums was 600 years of nonstop war across Europe. And again, I looked at this and is this scripted? Is this how they would control humanity's population for the carrying capacity? When they needed more people, they stopped the wars for a minute because they needed to build new cities. They needed new, stronger backs and extra hands to construct walls or something in the next great construction project. And as soon as it was finished, whoosh, the war started again. It was continuous. And at the end of it, I was just really sick of looking at all of that destruction and death for centuries upon centuries upon centuries. Squibbling and squabbling over the same, meters of earth. I did find quite a bit of mud flood in the paintings, resets on a natural basis. And that was what I was there studying, was trying to find the trigger for that natural reset. And we're coming into one. I absolutely 1,000% believe now what we're witnessing across the world with these massive floods. And I mean, they can blame geoengineering, which is another thing that dovetails into what Ransom was just talking about. Like, the control of the weather, we need to put up aerosol particles to reflect, the sunlight back in because of global warming, climate change. See the convenient excuse that was given for that, knowing that the weather was going to change. We're going to have these absurd rivers from the sky coming in. Now they just blame it on geoengineering. But wait, that was a conspiracy theory just even weeks ago, months ago. A year ago, it was a conspiracy. Now they're like, oh, we over geoengineered. So that's why DuByne got 3 years worth of rain in a day. And you look across the planet, there's all these accounts of floods happening everywhere. And if you look at what happened to Oman and Yemen, they have a 50 square mile lake that just formed. And you look at this, you say, well, I don't get it. Like, what is happening with geomagnetic storms? We got arc storms everywhere. You got Steve, the electric filament, popping back up all over the place. Tanzania, also, I'm pulling this one up here, severe floods, and the river did not double in size. It 10 or 20 times the size of the regular river. It's 20 times wider on either side of the river going out in the flooded areas. Largest flood ever recorded. Well, you can actually see it from space. That's how big it was. And you look at this, it's just continuously happening. And for those of you who want to go to theplanetstoday.com. That's a website, theplanetstoday.com. But see, the Earth is by itself out in front of the sun, and the four gas giants are finally starting to get into their square over this next, from now through October. And once the Earth gets on the inside of that magnetic field and gets grabbed by that, the movement of the electromagnetic field from the sun to the outer solar system, where all those gas giants are cordoned up there in a perfect square, the Earth is going to be that transistor, the capacitor in the center of that flow of electromagnetism. So if you think the jet streams are crazy now, or the floods are intense now, it's really going to start to ramp up, and the earthquakes are really going to start to hit. I would say, let me fast forward the model here. I'm not the best earthquake predictor, but I would say somewhere around the 4th or 5th of next month as we come in. Yeah, we're probably about Cinco de Mayo day. It looks like we're because Jupiter's, wait, let me pull that forward a couple days even. All right, so we're going to get into a perfect electromagnetic triangle here on the 22nd of May, where Jupiter is going to be equal and align with the sun and the earth, but then Saturn also is pulling on that, and it's going to be a perfect triangle of electromagnetism pulling back on our planet. Might even be on the 20th. The models are hard to eyeball that. I need to get some graphics out. But everywhere you look, there's some reason to explain away why all these things are happening. The geoengineering is the newest kid on the block now. You can't tell me with a straight face that they put geoengineering off into the conspiracy nutbag category for all of its existence of being known since the 1960s, when they were using silver iodide over Vietnam to try to flood out the Viet Cong, and even further back using cloud seeding during the Dust Bowl era. Now, cloud seeding in earnest had been going on even back into the late 1800s. There's an account in California, I forget the gentleman's name, but he was like, I can make it rain. And he shot all these rockets up, and it flooded the town of Sacramento so heavily that they had millions and millions of dollars worth of damage. So then they sued the guy for creating too much rain. All right, so this geoengineering program stretched way back into the late 1800s. But for us to talk about it coming out of aircraft, commercial aircraft, military aircraft, it was woo-woo stuff. Oh, they're not putting up particulates in the sky. No, you're a madman for thinking that. How dare you? You're just a lunatic. Jet fuel's always been like that, leaving those persistent contrails. But now, have you noticed, especially in the last 2 months forward to now, they have just been dripping the news media of every other article coming out about manipulating the weather, putting up, oh, we're testing reflective particles. Oh, it got flooded over in DuByne, it flooded here. We just been a storm over there. China's doing it. Kazakhstan's doing it. And you see everywhere now it is to cover the natural bending of the jet streams as we come into this extreme manipulation of our Earth's electromagnetic field. The skies will become more amplified and electrified. And this is a once in either a 400-year or 2,000-year cycle. Like as our Earth spins around through and lines up in this square of the gas giants, this quadrant that it is in, this squareness of those four, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, has not been seen since 79 AD. That's how far back this one cycle needs to go. If you are going to put the planets where they were almost 2,000 years ago, and we saw massive Earth changes at that point as well. Enough to reset society so much after the Christ, quote unquote, era, the new shift of a new age. And I had a great talk with somebody who was like, you know, the way you're trying to date the ages, you know, you're moving into Aquarius, and you're moving through Taurus, and you're moving out of Leo, and, you know, stepping back through the pyramids and going back that far, 10,500 years, and talking about Younger Dryas and this whole era moving forward and finding these timestamps across all of the museums in Europe of dating the era at which the reset occurred using the zodiac signs as the animals inside the paintings. And I saw it again and again and again and again and again. Now, the conversation was, were there 13 zodiac signs? And what we consider the ages would have been shorter than that they say, 72 years for 1 degree of arc around the great year, the 25,720 years approximately. Were there 13 zodiac signs? And then you start to look at Ophiuchus and, a few others that have come and gone and disappeared. Draco's another one. I mean, were these part of the zodiac originally? And this was the kind of questions and conversations that were had around Europe of the time dates, the stamps, and how time clocks. And it was so interesting as we went to this Egyptian display. Where are we at? Hungarian Museum of Natural History. It was one of the best Egyptian, displays I'd ever seen in my life. It was vast. It was the whole bottom of the museum. I mean, the whole floor was just nothing but Egyptian relics. And even they had an interactive one. You had to put on a rubber glove, but you could handle the actual Egyptian artifacts. So anyway, curator was there talking, or the person's given the allowing you to handle the objects. And they were talking about the calendar and the dates. And I was like, well, yeah, according to this calendar, but hasn't the calendar been reset? Because they were talking about the Egyptians, the way they counted time and calendars and months and days. And I was like, well, the calendar's been recalibrated, rewritten, reformulated umpteen times since the Egyptians, including the Mayans. And you can go through, forget the Gregorians, that's the latest mashup of trying to explain the lost days every leap year and thing. If you go back to the Mayans and look, they had a different calendar system on a 20-day month thing. So then again, how many extra months would you have in the year if you subtracted 10 days out of each month? Or 8 days, depending if it was February. You'd have multiple extra months. So again, is it as we're seeing what we're told here on the true times of where we are in time, space, and repeating cycles? Because the whole thing I kept getting at was the reason there was so much war in Europe through the last at least 600 years of solid paintings was because this same reset comes and destroys all the resources, and people get hungry and they need their kingdoms and fiefdoms to go, and empires to get out and get food and resources for the people so they don't get overthrown like they just did, because hungry people don't give the divine right to the leaders. If they are starving and hungry, the right to rule over the citizens is lost. Now, in China, they call it the mandate from heaven, revoked. But I didn't quite understand I understood the concept, but at a novice level, until I went to Europe, and then I looked at the starving people either had rebellions and overthrew dukes and earls and those of lesser leadership down the chain from the actual kings in the palaces with the private armies. And as the lesser towns were overrun by hungry, what we would consider zombies, these images were exactly depicting what we would know today as zombie movies. Clothes in tatters, half, ripped off clothing, emaciated faces, hordes of them coming in and taking over, example, a duke's residence, or the earls were removed because people were hungry. And at that point, the same thing was talked about in the little, they put a description below the paintings. There was a famine. These people were so hungry that the current leader was doing nothing for them. So they took it upon themselves to remove that leader, to allow somebody else to come to power, to then hopefully, quote unquote, solve their problem. And then that turned on my light bulb to look at everything I saw in a different fashion. And the resets after reset after reset. So there was one approximately 1550. That's a close one in. And then around 1803 or 1805, there was another one. So I'm looking going, all right, these are coming on like 150-year time frames or so, plus or minus. But these grand solar minimum resets are on 400 years, plus or minus like 7 or 8 years if you want to get really nitty gritty into it. Could be 397 or 393 or 394 years, you know, depending. The longer ones could be 407 years. I mean, it's within that range. But the same thing, I start to look at these resets that were very visible in the paintings. See, that's the whole thing. Like you get these paintings like 1470, everything is perfect condition. All the marble arches are there, and you know, well-kept streets, and not a plant growing anywhere that's on top of a ruin. And then you fast forward into like 1560 era paintings, everything's crumbled. You got trees growing out of the tops of where the arches were that are now collapsed. You got vegetation growing out through. People will refound what they lost. Like they walked into leftover kingdoms, and then they rebuild them, and then you get into the next reset, and it's like this again and again and again, and then it's overlapping with all of this war and all of these empires and kings and fiefdoms and whatever going out to find more resources for the people after these resets. And the naval museums as well. When I was in Italy, you know, dusty old naval museums, like nobody goes in these places. But I tried to trace one down in Hungary too, but they were closed for, I don't know why you close a naval museum or a military history museum, but it was closed permanently. Okay. But the ones I found in Italy was really interesting because it showed all the star forts. And when I say star forts, I am talking something that is so massive and so unbelievably large that I question whether humans built it. And if it was humans, they would have to be 12-foot tall humans with superhuman strength of giants to literally construct 70, 80-foot tall walls of terraces, multiple 80-foot terraces on top of each other. And when you look back at this, you know, you're looking at something that's 500-foot tall of just stone terraced walls going up, and, you know, taking peninsula isthmus and just grinding straight through with, you know, half-mile wide canals, and then setting walls on both sides of that. And I'm like, you know what? Nobody's going to do that unless it was a prior era or you had a way better tech where you could move heavy stone. Now, that was all through the Italian Naval Museum in Venice. Like they had a full star fort everywhere the Italian Navy controlled in the 1400s up to the 1600s was there as topographic star fort maps, and they even had each individual star fort in its own plaque. So then you could see the time frames too of the resets there. But the cities, yeah, one thing, but was ingrained in that museum was the ports continuously changed. Suddenly they were silted in and they were unusable. And then they were a quarter mile inland one day, and then magically, you know, I asked then I started to ask a lot of questions, like, well, you know, not just at that museum, but others, you know, when we went to other museums in different areas, like, you're telling me, why did they stop using the port? You know, like, how did it get so silted in? And then the same excuse again and again and again, and they must have told everybody to use this excuse. Oh, of course, the river changed. Okay. It changed that much on every river across Italy that all those ports back were all unusable in the same era, and like literally every single river changed course in the same 10 years across the entire what we know as Italy right now. This is what I'm talking about, is something is happening on these cycles, and it pings back to like the 1550s. And there's again another set that pings right around early 1800s. I'm looking at this thinking, all right, we are at the cusp of it again here. This is why you're seeing all of the economy shift, because businesses and big money understand that their working assets or their capital management or whatever country it's in is going to have to be restructured, because some of these areas are going to go offline and be very destroyed and upset. And they've already mapped it out. I guarantee they absolutely know the areas on the planet that are going to be the most damaged during this cycle. Now, the beginning of the cycle is now. There's going to be the first apex, October 23rd, I'll call it, or somewhere around there, in October of this year coming up. So the madness that Ransom was talking about leading into the election is the same madness on a natural reset scale, that the weather is going to be so intense and devastating that is actually probably going to preempt all of this election talk. That the weather disturbances and the natural disasters will be as large of a news, well, it will be competing with all of the madness of the election cycle, at least in our country. Now, other areas, it's going to just be the story. That's all it will be. So for a perfect example, when I was in Hungary just last week, we got there about 2 weeks ago, and it was super warm. Everybody was saying, wow, this is really warm for spring. Okay, I get you. The weather's changing. I told you that you knew. Ransom might have been talking about this for a couple of years, that you're going to start to really see it in 2024, that there's going to be extremes everywhere that make no sense. Well, this was one of them. So spring came early, and everything budded out. All the fruit trees they were like at the fullest maximum blossoms that you could get. Like Japan has a festival called the cherry blossoms. Like every tree's bloomed out at the same time. All the wine vines had bloomed. Every single fruit and vegetable production too, like all the grasses came up, all the subtle shoots were out already. It's in the infancy stage, very, easily damageable when plants are young and supple like that. Well, anyway, they're like, it's going to get cold. It might snow. I'm like, what? You got 80-degree temperatures, and like tomorrow you're telling me it's going to be below freezing. Okay. So anyway, that did happen. Now, where we were, it dropped into about 34 degrees, but that was in the middle of a city in Budapest, because we went to Bucharest also, but Budapest in Hungary. And I had never seen the weather change so fast. You could feel it drop, and you could feel the humidity and dew just start to cling to everything, and the whole city became wet in like a few hours. It was the craziest thing that you could experience. It was totally bone dry, like desert, zero humidity, like leading up to that event, where everything, you could just feel the dryness in the air. I even had to use extra moisturizer because it was just so dry. I put olive oil all over myself, But the very next day, as that storm front was coming in, the entire city became a dew-dropped water on every surface thing, and you could just feel the temperature drop, and like then you could start to see your breath, and it became that really wet down to your bone cold. And in the morning, woke up and got the weather reports. It snowed in Slovenia, and it wiped out almost all of the fruit production in Central and Eastern Europe. So they were just like aghast at the revenue projected for the countries on the fruit sector and the farming sector is absolutely just going to near zero. Because at the same time, Hungary, which is on the border with Ukraine, and by the way, what you're seeing over there, like all this madness, like all the world's expanding, it is going to be expanding. In Hungary, the guys are in training now. So we talked to our taxi driver a couple of times. He's a guy about my age, and he's like, yeah, it's going to spill over here first into Hungary. So they're already on alert and getting ready for the spillover of the war. Now, not this week, not next week, but they feel it's coming because that is an integral part of Europe. It always has been. It's been the north, south, east, west movement of troops and supplies since time immemorial. Like that is a must-have piece of real estate in any war, must have it. So when it spills out, they need that as the crossroads to get into the rest of Europe. So anyway, they're getting the arms defense up, and all the guys are getting called up to do training, and everybody's getting ready for the war to spill into Hungary. But the thing was, Ransom, one last thought here. In Ukraine was dumping so much farm produce over the borders there because all their ports are destroyed, so they couldn't let anything go seabound, outbound cargo. So in Ukraine, then they were dumping all of the food, literally just like millions of tons of stuff coming over the borders and just saturating to the point it was bankrupting the local farmers. And not just in Hungary, but in Poland and Lithuania and all up even further in toward Germany and, And so the farmers were so, and that, seeing the farmer protests, like we didn't see any because I was actually looking for the farmer protests because we went out to this area that had like 7 star forts in this one city. Further up on the border right there was Slovakia going north. It was right up on a river there on the Danube River. And Montovun was the name of this big star fort complex up there. So I went up there and there were 7 star forts in this one city. 7 in one city. Fortified walls everywhere, star forts everywhere. And we had to go through wine country up there on a train to get there. And I was thinking, man, there's got to be some farmer protests out here. We found none. We couldn't find any. Apparently the protests had stopped. Like we didn't know that. When I got there, I was like, man, this is going to be crazy. I want to check out these farmer protests up there. I'm going to get out in the countryside and stuff. They had passed laws where Ukraine now, they stopped everything from Ukraine coming over the border. So Ukraine's just sitting back on a Himalayan-sized pile of fresh eggs, meat, grains, fruits, veggies, all that kind of stuff. It's just stuck all behind the border over there. And then the instant they cut it off, like all the prices rose 40% for food because they didn't have that big over glutted supply coming in. So, now people are realizing they're stuck between a rock and no hard place. They got nowhere to go. For the food pricing in Europe, they have realized everybody's waking up at the same time. And this is the interesting thing. Everybody supported the farmer protests. And that's a great thing because you need to protect your local farming industry. And at the same time, they just got Charlie Foxtrotted there because when they cut off the Ukrainian supplies, all of their food prices rose. And that's another contentious point people were talking about. They don't know what they can do anymore because anytime they protest the central government on something, there's another effect that happens, which then causes them to have big inflation again on the food. So they're stuck in this spiral. They need the food from Ukraine, but they can't let it in because they're dumping. But if they cut off all of the Ukrainian, what they had to, it was either all or none. They're not going to let some Ukrainian stuff come in so once all that firewalled off, all that food supply coming out of Ukraine, then it just inflated away. And now they're stuck again going, well, we can't really let some of it in and still support the farmers. And they're expecting another 20% food inflation this next 4 to 6 weeks. That's insane. It was up 40%, at least in this last, since the beginning of the year. And they're expecting another 10 to 20% coming in the next 6 weeks. And as we were there, go out to a restaurant and the prices were changing so quickly, they were using stickers on the menu everywhere we went. And they just didn't even have time to reprint the menus because they're like, we've changed the stickers 3 times already since the beginning of the year. We're going to need to change the stickers again at the end of the month to adjust the pricing. This is the kind of thing I was experiencing firsthand. Now try to put all that together with history, with the sieges, with the resets. Put it together today with the hyperinflating or barely at the edge of hyperinflating food prices and people getting angry. And we're coming into another natural reset at the same time of all of this civilization upset. And I am absolutely unequivocally telling anybody listening out there, these cycles are known and everything you're seeing on the planet happening right now is scripted and planned and as an excuse for everything natural happening so you will not blame the elite for not warning you and your families as to what is coming and what is here, what is happening. I will go to my grave believing that and knowing that as fact. They're ready to sacrifice this whole planet and rule over the ashes to still control whatever remains after the reset without giving anybody enough advanced warning to really prepare. And as it moves through, they're just going to use draconian, dictatorial powers, swoop and grab that from the hands of republics and just, battle ram their way through to control everybody, whoever's left during and after this time. It was the most bizarre. When I come back, I'm kind of shaken after that trip because the people in Europe were externalizing their anger of doubling food prices. In Croatia, everything had doubled in price because they moved from the kuna into 100% euro. They externalized it to the government. But in Japan, they lost 50% of their value. You know, the Japanese yen went from 100 to 150 for a dollar. They internalized it. And there it was the land of sorrows. And, you know, going around the planet, watching other people's money get ripped in shreds and people's lifestyles, working twice as hard to buy half as much stuff. And watching the Japanese internalize that, and I just felt sick to my soul coming out of that place. Everybody was so darkly depressed there because they could see it's ramping up, that it's just the beginning of the deflation, or I should say the stagflation / hyperinflation that's coming to the nation. Just today, they need to cut their interest rates again. But when they do that, that's going to add more inflation. Like, it's just never ending. It's never going to stop. You can see it from all sides. And, you know, one thing, again, of warning for anybody out there, if you're listening, you are going to have to get ready for this shift. It's here. There's no way to avoid it. And the money is the key point. The pivot for everything is the economy and how much wealth they can extract by inflating the money away and diverting and taking those resources and that asset, that value, to another place that will survive better through this, whatever's coming in the next 9 months. So, Ransom, I know I rambled, man. I'm just, you could have jumped in at any time to stop me or say something.
Ready for, massive issues, at least here in the United States. They're saying this is going to be the worst ever hurricane season. And it might be. And, that kind of brings us to the point that we're always talking about being prepared. How prepared are people? Just the idea of Middle East wars by itself should make you think about prepping on certain things that you would need to pay money for, that has to do with petroleum products. Everything from plastic to just having gasoline on hand. And I'm not talking about like the whole thing shutting down forever, but there's been plenty of summers where they pull some kind of Middle East emergency, and then, all of a sudden the gas prices are skyrocketing. So wouldn't it be nice to have several tanks of gas already so you could just ignore that? It's something like, a couple of years ago with the toilet paper outage. We don't buy like massive amounts of toilet paper here in our house. I know that's a weird topic, but we just add the normal amount, a few stacked back for later so we don't have to go to the store. And during that entire time, we didn't run out of toilet paper, and we weren't using it more or, freaking out about it. And by the time the stores filled back up with toilet paper was right when, we finally started running out. So that was a good example of just, looking ahead to what you don't want to do, because I don't want to go to the store all the time. So we try to buy certain things where we don't have to go. I know that sounds like a lazy aspect, but when these things happen, you don't have to go to the store, and you're sitting at home with a little more confidence, knowing that, you have the gas to go somewhere, you have food to eat in case there's some kind of problems. I think most people's weak spot is water, and that kind of brings us back to beware of the water bearer. Is it going to be a bad year? I was looking at some kind of anecdotal predictions, and I'm sure you've heard of, I forget how to say her name, Baba Vanga and her prophecies. She died a few years ago, but according to a lot of people, she predicted the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami that killed, lots of people, that came right after Japan's 7.6 magnitude earthquake. But she also predicted that in 2024, a devastating earthquake of great proportions would take place in the United States, of such magnitude that will change the course of the waters of the Mississippi River and will leave many lives lost, in addition to great material damage. It's kind of a vague prediction, but we do know that there is, a giant fault that has had some of the world's biggest earthquakes hit at it, and that's the New Madrid Fault there, and it would and did change the course of the Mississippi River before. Now, whether or not that's going to happen, it really doesn't matter. Do you live in an area anywhere along the coast? Because according to mainstream meteorologists, the forecast groups predict the busiest hurricane season on record with 33 storms. Isn't that nice? That's the pinnacle of understanding there. But you're right. They have been saying stuff that I never thought they would say on the news outlets, admitting to many geoengineering programs. Whether or not they have a big enough effect to actually change the course of natural cycles on Earth is up for debate. I don't think that it really does. However, Bill Gates and others, and all kinds of people have been putting particles up in the ionosphere in different places, spraying stuff, salts, reflective particles, different things like that. So it wouldn't be that far of a stretch to think that if the coming decades were to be cooler than man is used to for the last, say, 2,000 years, they might believe that these, Bond villains actually pulled it off and helped save us from global warming. Can you imagine them taking credit for that like they take credit for everything else? And when you look back at these cycles, there's one thing that goes along with the massive destruction, and that's that they say the gods were upset. And whether they were gods or a god or, gods is kind of irrelevant, because in our new transhuman world, the elite think that they are God, and they want us to worship them in various different ways. One of those is to pay tribute, a tithe or more of taxes. They want you to pay for breathing, that carbon credit limit that they have placed on each individual human. But they're not doing that over in China. So it seems like there is a plan unfolding, and that is literally the destruction of classical civilization, meaning anything that was old and withstood the test of time, especially in Europe, is going to be destroyed. And they're going to remake it in a new image. I don't know what that image is going to be, but I don't think it's going to be a very nice one. So what about these predictions of all of these ancient civilizations? You can go from the Veda. If you're a Christian, you can go with Jesus Christ and beware of the water bearer. But lots of ancient peoples, and you're right, it's all based on zodiac. So if you know how to read the paintings, you get an accurate date of within a couple thousand years of when all of this was taking place. A good example of that is Moses from the Bible. I don't know if you saw any Christian paintings while you're going through Europe, but most of the time, if they depict Moses, he has horns. And the reason for that is because he was the time of Aries. And, everybody knows the story of the golden calf when Moses went up to the mountain and he came back down and they were worshiping the golden calf and he was angry. And that is a direct reference to the end of the time of Taurus and the beginning of the time of Aries. Now we go through Aries, and then we go through the two fish, which is obviously the sign of the last 2,000 years, Pisces, and that time is over. And all of these ancient civilizations were expecting, and then it gets into the point, and I know we've talked about this, but I've re-estimated basically how long I think at least civilization has been around. And I think that would have to be at a technological term of at least paying attention to celestial events and marking them down. I once thought it was probably, twice the 26,000 year thing, but now I think it would have to be 3 times that. You would have to see it happen once. You'd have to see it happen twice to know that there was a repeating cycle, and a third time to verify that indeed is, the cycle that happens, the precession of the equinox. So that dates basically human civilization at least at 78,000 years ago or 80,000 years ago, if you just want to round it up. Now, I've been doing a lot of genetic research, and weird stuff has popped up, just ironically in my own research. My maternal haptype happens to be one of the oldest haptypes in Eurasia. It's a U2E. And weirdly, I also have found, the Paracas skulls down in Peru very, interesting. And I've paid a lot of attention to that. And now they've done blood tests and got haptypes. So, those guys with the big O elongated head, they share the same haptype as I do from antiquity. Now, what they're doing in Peru, I don't know. But I think it has to do with these events that you're talking about. At least 3,000 years or more, there was groups of Eurasian people with elongated heads, and I think that it's very possible those were the ruling class at the time. Now, they look different than humans, obviously, if you've seen the skulls. So they had some kind of turmoil and some kind of turnover, probably at the end of the beginning of Pisces, when there was a new thing. And we know this because they have Eurasian DNA, and they sailed across somewhere to get in South America, 3,000 years ago. And we'll get back into that when we get back from the commercial break. But it's all panning out and related to today's events.
They're destroying the old system. They've already got a new system in the works to replace it.
Just under 1,500 years ago, something terrifying happened to the world's climate, something nobody could understand. The sun began to go dark. Rain, the color of blood, poured from the skies. Clouds of fine dust enveloped the earth. Winter gripped the land for 2 years. Then came drought, famine, plague, and death. Whole cities were wiped out. Civilizations crumbled, and nobody knew what had happened. It was a catastrophe that affected millions and millions of people all around the world. But what was it? A catastrophic climatic event buried in the heart of the Dark Ages. This mid-6th century catastrophe was the most important date in the history of the past 2,000 years. This event created the world we live in today, something far removed from the minds of everyday peoples of our modern times. Unbeknownst to most, the catastrophe could at any time happen again. The volcanic winter was caused by at least 3 simultaneous eruptions of uncertain origin, with several possible locations proposed in various continents. There is even evidence of an extraterrestrial factor. A possible origin for this object could be the Taurid meteor stream. This stream is the result of the fragmentation of a much larger comet some 20,000 years ago. The Earth passes through the Taurid stream in November and June each year, resulting in regular meteor showers normally consisting of microscopic dust particles. A fragmentation of the stream is thought to have occurred around 500. It is possible that a fragment could then have collided with the Earth as it passed through the beta portion of the stream early in 536, causing the atmospheric dust veil event. The relevance is crop failures for several years in a row. While the dust veil was present, it may have caused widespread starvation, leading to an increased susceptibility to disease among the remaining population. Small comets had previously been thought to be less hazardous than small asteroids, but estimates show that a small comet fragment can have a global effect. In early AD 536, or possibly even late 535, an eruption or eruptions ejected massive amounts of sulfate aerosols into the atmosphere. The solar radiation reaching the Earth's surface reduced dramatically, and this rapidly cooled the atmosphere. Despite what the global warming nuts say, the sun seems to be the main driver of temperature and climate. The main historical aspect of the period around 536 may also be the most significant, especially to those descendants of the survivors. Who would be us today? This period coincides with a mass population decrease in Europe, in the Americas, the Middle East, and in Asia. In Europe, this is commonly known as the Justinian period, named after the Justinian plague, and is believed to be the first appearance of the Black Death in Europe. Meanwhile, in the Mayan Empire, things were looking bad. Researchers have realized that there is a 100-year gap in the civilization's productivity starting in 540, suggesting a dark age. The civilization experienced mass crop failure, which led to disease, starvation, and likely internal strife. People evacuated cities in and around present-day El Salvador. Cities that were left behind experienced a dark age, as evidenced by a gap in written records and a sudden decrease in construction in Maya city centers during the 6th century. In China, 536 was no better. Frost and snow in July and August that killed the seedling crop, causing a major famine the following autumn. Weather was so severe that 70 to 80% of the people starved to death. Procopius. The sun gave forth its light without brightness, like the moon, during this whole year, and it seemed exceedingly like the sun in eclipse. The sun was dark, and its darkness lasted for 18 months. Each day it shone for about 4 hours, and still this light was only a feeble shadow. Michael the Syrian. If such an event happened today, and crops failed over a significant part of the globe for several consecutive years, then once again a large percentage of the world's population would face starvation. Thankfully, unlike the peoples of the worst year to be alive, we don't have to worry about not having food to last. We have my Patriot supply. And right now, you can save $200 on a 3-month food kit with Adapt 2030. Adapt and stay prepared.
And as always, if you appreciate free speech, which is becoming more and more rare, consider a donation. Revolution.radio, many ways for you to contribute for the running costs, production costs, and keeping this station on air. Because as you see, every time you want to talk about something, it becomes more dangerous. And, you know, as I was traveling in Europe, those censorship laws were coming in full force across Europe, where everywhere from Scotland to England, all the way down, even over into Eastern Europe and some of these places, Germany, France, anywhere you can't say anything against a company, you can't talk against the government, you gotta, if you say something ill, it's a hate speech crime now. Anything you talk, literally almost any conversation you have will put you afoul with the law. And see, another thing that was talked about with those that are living in Eastern Europe, they're telling me that we're coming back into, they're pointing at America saying, you're also doing the same thing with these censorship laws. We've lived this once. My grandfather lived this already through one time to see the beginning of it. Through the end of what they considered freedom from the Soviet Union. But post-World War II, that began. And they are so shocked that we can't see its beginning here. But they're also trying to fight it more over there because they've already seen it once. And they're like, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And we're not going to go through that whole communist thing again. At least there's still a generation that remembers what happened. And, you know, coming out of all that 30 years ago, there's still a lot of people alive that were alive in the 1950s, 40s, 1960s, when it was still under Soviet Union control. And that whole, we're going to swing back over into one loaf of bread for you, one loaf of bread for me, is not going to cut it in Europe. Not going to happen. And they're shocked that it's happening here in our midst, that we don't even see what's going on. They're just looking at us going, whoa, you guys are going the same way that the Soviets did. They create an enemy, they dehumanize, they get left and it's not even left and right at this point. It's you're non-human, you're an animal, or you're the quote unquote enemy is the animal, the non-human. And notice how they've already picked sides and divided that direction anyway. You're this, you're that, you're a bloodthirsty this. They describe as animals. And we've already reached that point. Now the next point is the enforcement. Well, we're already in that too. Or, you know, now people are telling people what they can say, what they can't say, and if you don't abide by the narratives from the regime, then you are deemed an enemy. And of course, you're removed off of the talking platforms or where you can, you know, push your information out. We are at that point now. They're closing down newspapers. They're censoring critics. They're arresting critics. You know, we are so close borderline into now the roundups. And I've said it before, you know, after talking to many people and even my own thing here, it's not about candidates on right or left here. It's about this political behemoth that continues in this nation. If it is not able to be usurped coming up in November, We are absolutely going into a dictatorship, and at that point, the roundups shall commence. Maybe not on day one, but within 2025, that era, that year, the full amount of closure of newspapers and silencing of critics and removal from social media will ramp up so heavily that it will be too late to stop it. And at that point, they will have the enforcers called those people that are not from this country to come up and get the favors if they do the enforcing. See, that was the whole thing with the Bolshevik Revolution, too. You know, you pit people against each other. You got people who are not from that area, and they are the enforcers because they got no allegiance. They got no families. They don't have anything there. They're just paid hired, hatchet men, for a better term. And then the roundups began, and the roundups will begin here too. So, for me, it's more of an integral thing of, I've seen this coming for a while, but sitting in Europe in these last 4 months, looking at this just decay of society for 600 years and how this communist thing flows in and these Marxist ideologies. And, previous Marxist ideologies were an empire's dictates from the ruler, and that's how it was supposed to be. And you couldn't ever say no. And some forms of overseership of the citizens worked, others didn't. Fairness, maybe not. But now we actually can put labels to what occurred in the 14 and 1500s that we really couldn't put labels to. Same, but different. So again, Revolution Radio, thank you for letting us talk about these things, because next year, if the blue party stays in with the blue flags, we are marching, and I will say we will have crossed the line into what Europe experienced in 1930s. It is history repeating so cleanly that's why I say I have mixed emotions about coming back from Europe this time, knowing what's happening in our own country after seeing, and since a big kid, I remember that day when the wall came down, and that was the thing that I talked to a couple people down. Like, I remember that. And anybody alive long enough to remember, like, well, you wake up the next day and the Soviet Union kind of collapsed, and here they are chipping down the Berlin Wall, right? Remember that? You woke up and you're like, dude, they got sledgehammers on the wall and stuff, because they were like 6 hours ahead of us in the time zone. They're already up there at 6 a.m., double espresso, breaking down the wall with hammers. We finally wake up at noon on their time, and they're already got holes in the wall, And the crazy thing is, Germany is in such dire straits right now with a collapsing economy. The huge 50% of the businesses are out of business. Electrical costs and energy costs are 10 times higher than they were before the Russian invasion, before the war. And the largest amount of migrants and the largest amount of movement that are, don't forget the Africans and all that, everybody coming up from Middle East and stuff. But the largest amount of migrants coming into Hungary right now are from Germany, because they need to escape the plight they're in of hyperinflating food and energy costs, and they have to choose whether to eat or freeze to death in their house. And then they can't even say anything online, because if they do, they're arrested. They're dragged out of their house in the middle of the night. Police visit your door for tweets, and then also for certain political affiliations, depending of which side of the spectrum you're swung on. If you're in a far right-leaning party, you're considered an enemy of the state in Germany, and they come to your door at night and knock on it, just like it was with the Stasi. It's crazy how history is repeating in Europe also right now. And they are fleeing Germany to leave that, what they call, quote unquote, persecution for free speech and the economic decay and decline. And they're leaving to go to Hungary. That's insane. So where do we go? What happens to our country here? So anyway, Ransom, I know I tangent on it there a bit, but the destruction of the old age, the thing I saw in Italy too, was that age change. They destroyed everything of the old age. Like, all the noses were chipped off. They broke all the arms off the statues. They gouged the eyes out, because they used to have crystals in the eyes of all the statues across, what you consider Roman, Greek statues, etc., marble. They had crystal eyes in every single one of those. So when the age changed, whatever it was, the energetic flow, whatever, they broke every single statue, and anything associated with the old was broken, buried, and then suddenly the new all began. It's kind of like the Cultural Revolution, where everything was all new. They wanted to destroy all the relics and bring in. And then You know, this is where we sit today. So again, Revolution Radio, thank you for letting us talk about this, because next year, depending on how it goes, we either are going into a full dictatorship here with the roundups and the camps, or we're not. That's how clean it is. It's going to be a black and white divide line. We're going to they're going to round up or they're not. And we're at that point. So free speech is going to be here somewhere or not. So Revolution Radio, please consider giving a donation so we can keep talking about this, because we need to fight it. It's not going away. It's coming after us. It's never going to end. It's a Terminator narrative. It's a Terminator societal reset change coming at you, and it will never, ever stop until it achieves its goal. And we need to stop it. And we can do that only through conversation. So there you go, Ransom.
You know, oddly, with everything you said is kind of exactly where I was going, and why I brought up these elongated head people that we find.
I saw that
Peru.
in Hungary also. And let me stop you. I did see an elongated skull in the Hungarian museum there in Budapest town. They had an elongated skull in one of the exhibits there. They said they found it at 600 AD.
Right, that makes sense. That's probably, you know, one of the last of the people like that, actually. And the little examples that you were giving all kind of go right into this. And I'll tell you a story of these elongated head people, as it seems like it is, which has some real big correlations with what you were talking about, all the way down to the camps, all the way down to the ethnic cleansing, the whole thing. So we don't know who these people were exactly. We just call them the Paracas people. We find them in Peru. We know that they left Europe probably about 3,000 years ago and settled in Peru, started farming and building unique stuff, putting up, complex geometric shapes and sacred geometry. But their story started in Eurasia, which is right around, the Black Sea area, which is ironic because this is a story of cycles surviving, and, that you can't really escape these cycles that happen. So for an example, these people came out of Eurasia right there, and they have the U, which is one of the oldest mitochondrial haptypes. So they have U2E, which is straight out of Eurasia, so there's really no arguing that. Now, why they have elongated heads is a totally different conversation. Was it a different hominid? Were they a group of mutants? Was it the actual elite of the time, which I think that's kind of in the right direction. But all of that aside, they're a story of people that continually had to move because of migrations. So they live there in Eurasia. We don't really know whereabouts they fit into these ancient cultures, the corded ware people and stuff like that's where we start finding that. But me as myself, and as an example, my ancestry comes out of Ireland and the UK and comes to America, but I'm carrying that same haptype that these elongated head people had in antiquity. Now, something happened in Europe that caused them to run, and they ran. And they kept setting up in new places. And this is the example in Europe, especially, that waves of people showed up, and the people that lived there before disappeared. So we can't really say, they got killed and sent to camps and stuff like that. Not exactly. However, when it comes down to it, their genetics disappeared off the map when the new waves of people. And this happens several times in Europe. That gives us different demographics today. So these group of elongated head people had to have fit in there somewhere, and they had to run. And they ended up running so far away that they found the New World. Ironically, though, in my opinion, they knew where they were going because that's exactly where all the megalithic monuments and something from the ancient civilization that is pre-Diluvian had something to do with that, I guarantee you. Even though they changed the dates and try to make it more recent, it's somewhat obvious that these are way older monuments. So back to the elongated head people, they run. We find remnants of their people in Iran, Egypt, around there. So most definitely, these were a high class of people as far as knowledge. And we see this around that same time period in all of the world, where the accumulated knowledge and mathematics, sacred geometry, the precession of the equinox, and all of these things are now being crammed and occulted in religions about 2,000 years ago. They're turning into Pisces. This is the same time that the old world factions seem to be running around. And I use the elongated head people for an example because we can track their haptype throughout history. It expands westward through Europe and ends up being in different places in Europe. It goes to the Middle East. It's there in the Middle East. But it also comes to the Americas. Now, they have a peaceful time for a long time, seemingly, in South America, living their life on the coast. They reset, they restarted. But then comes the Nazca people. The Nazca people show up, and then once again, they have to run, and they end up running to the Inca people. But we know that there was some really violent things surrounding resources that happened to the Paracas people by the Nazca people. And everybody knows about the Nazca lines and stuff, but what they probably don't know is that all of the most complicated ones and the oldest ones are not Nazca at all. They're actually Paracas. And it seems that they moved there from Eurasia and the Middle East, and they sailed there only to be ethnic cleansed once again after they got up and started for a few hundred years. Now, what coincides with their ending there in the Peruvian coast is the worst year to be alive, ironically. And when you look around at all of the empires in 536 AD, all of the remnants of the old empires completely disappear and new empires begin. So in South America, it's the beginning of different cultures that start up, but it's the ending of the Paracas culture. And what we find are mass graves where the Nazca killed them. But years later, maybe decades, 100 years later, the Nazca people didn't understand how to farm the same way that the Paracas people did. So they began to go hungry and drought-stricken the area too. And then they go dig up those old bones and start doing divination and stuff, trying to get the rains to come back. But my point being, you can see the cycle through the people. And every time they have to run and move, there's a new place in the old world that they could go settle, start over, and restart their civilization. And they're roundabout to what you're talking about in modern times. People had no real place to run in Europe anymore. The empire that was chasing them was so big that it had them covered, and they couldn't really get out anywhere. The same thing happened in ancient times where people just disappeared off the map. So now we get to today, and you're talking about the possibility of these camps showing up again. And we have to remember the ethnic cleansing has been going on nonstop for decades and decades in Africa and the Middle East and different places. Now it's happened a lot in Europe in the 90s, as you remember when the breakaways happened. Speaking of the wall coming down, a lot of people died after that. The same thing in World War II. A lot of people forget that after 6 million people were killed of one kind of people and millions of other kinds of people thrown in there and were also killed, that directly after that, the Allied forces went in and killed 12 million citizens of that country that they just went to war with. 12 million people they eradicated. If you look into like Dresden and other things, we carpet bombed it, we flattened it, we turned it into an inferno, and where the supposed good guys were now doing the same thing that the bad guys were doing. And you see this all throughout history. So it's hard to pick a team and not think that with a moment's notice, it could turn totalitarian and start fixating on different groups of people. Now, we already know which groups of those people are in the Western world, and you're seeing the beginnings of it. Now, when they're outnumbered, you're going to see exactly that. The new government's capitulating to the new populations. We have to get rid of certain people, their ideas, their way of life, their historical connection to the land. And the same thing is happening everywhere around the world. So we are no different coming into Aquarius than people were coming into Pisces. And as you remember, this is the end of the multi-god pantheon that represented the precession of the equinox. This is when the occult mystery schools took their knowledge and hid with it. They reset. And the old Roman Empire became the new Christian Empire. And it continued to have empire, though, and you see how that is. Now we're at the cusp of this new age that all of the main figures of the old age in the ancient world warned us about. And the reason that they warned us about it, because it seems like for 78,000 years, people have been arguing about which kind of people have blood rights to which land and who can rule at what time, according to the signs in the skies, like they used to say in the ancient world. It's just not in your stars. Well, they really believe that because all the way back in Sumeria, if you read, their stuff, at different times, different people ruled the earth. Now, you can call them gods, you can call them Anunnaki, you can, maybe they were just, like I said, a different hominid species that was intermixing with humans, which I think is where you get these elongated head people. And if you remember, the depictions of the Anunnaki have these weird cone heads. You see the same thing in Egypt, and they're digging up more and more of these elongated heads around the Crimea area. If you follow the work of Brian Forrester, all of this is connected. And what it is people running every time empires change and the cycle goes over. They replace the old with the new. And unfortunately for the populations of the world, every time they do that, massive amounts of people are removed from the planet in one way or another. Now, wouldn't it be convenient to wrap this back over to, the worst year to be alive? Wouldn't it be convenient if some kind of natural phenomenon sparked change in the amount of crops that were grown worldwide? In other words, so like that was the worst year ever. They blame it on volcanoes, possibly a cosmogenic origin, like the meteor field colliding with the earth, right? So if that were to happen again, which by the way, it's time to happen again, by the way, just so we might move through a field and this could trigger the same thing again. Now, last time it seemed to have raised or caused havoc across mainly North America. From North America all the way over into the Middle East, and Europe was devastated, right? With no sun. And then when you go back to a further cycle, like at the end of the Hungary Dryas, whatever happened then also destroyed North America, Europe, and parts of Asia, seemingly leaving Southern Africa and South America and different places untouched. And that's why we still have megafauna in those places. But the weird thing is think about if 180 million people just moved out of remote areas in third world countries closer to the equator, and then cram-packed in all the cities that are already overpopulated as far as density, because we've always had a density problem of population, not a population problem, but a population density problem. All of those people are now. So what would happen if just in the course of the natural cycle, it began to increasingly become cold for any various number of reasons, whether it's just the step down of the sun, whether there's cosmogenic effects of stuff in space that cause that, or earthquakes and volcanoes rear up. What happens? Well, you have all of the people concentrated in the same areas. How convenient for those people that want to depopulate the planet. So I'm not saying I'm Nostradamus, but it sure does seem like a lot of coincidences have formed out a map that you could look at, and you can tell where the people are going to disappear from, where all of the problems are going to be focused at. And also by that logic, you can see where their plans are for the future and this new age. And a lot of people have a hard time dealing with these big ages because they're 2,000 years long approximately. So, like, who cares? I'm not going to be alive. But when you look at their plans, these people do care. They are keeping track. These are the people with the occult knowledge. These are the descendants of the groups of people that occulted that knowledge of the pre-Diluvian world. So, we had thousands of years where people thought it was very important to keep track of whatever information there was before the end of the Hungary Dryas. And that included, at least for our sake, an understanding of the sky and the precession of the equinox, which allowed the rise of farmers to come again. And, if what happens this time, though, when our information is not set in stone, the technologies are not right there for people to understand as far as coming across it and understanding somebody did this, we could also do that. Who knows what it's going to look like, because they have replaced everything, including the building materials. I mean, think about that. A lot of people look into the field of what happens after humans. And the truth is, it wouldn't be but a couple of 100 years before there's barely any remnants of what you see today as a civilization. We're nothing like these ancient civilizations. We haven't left a mark on the earth in the way that they did. I mean, think about just the Great Pyramid of Giza, or even the Temple of the Sun there in Mexico, these giant pyramids that have withstood the test of time. They're just sitting there, and we have no idea who built them, why they built them. And all we know is that several waves of people through several cataclysms have come out and found them over and over again, sparking civilization to start again. It seems like the technocrats know this cycle and have never been able to completely control man worldwide. And I think that they feel like this is their shot. This is the time they can do it. They have the right tools. They have the right situation. We're in the right cycle. All of the religions are playing along, as far as it seems like they're creating self-fulfilling prophecies when it comes to the Abrahamic religions. But it's also self-fulfilling prophecies when you look into the ancient mystery schools and predictions for this time, that this would be a time of turmoil, turnover, rebirthing, and a reset. It's all the same language, and it takes place right now. We are entering this Aquarius period, which means that if you take into account ancient stories, somebody else just took over. It's somebody else's job to rule under the stars right now. Who that is, I don't know. There's a lot of opinions on that, but it does seem to have to do with AI, and the fact that AI being so exponentially growing right now seems like an inevitable result of our time. So when people, and after several cataclysms again, only have one option for information, it'll be these groups of families and royalties and multi-billionaires that now pose and present themselves as the masters and the gods. And that's what it seems like, exactly what's going on, that they're setting up right now, is they have to get themselves in positions to be considered gods. And I kind of gave an example of that, like Bill Gates and some of these other people saying they're doing these geoengineering programs to cool down the earth, when most of the people that study this topic have figured out that we are already at the beginning of a long cooling period, at least 80,000 years. And when you think about that, you realize that the people that at the end, by the time it ever starts to warm up again, will not even be the same species as the species living on the planet now. And you can just go back 80,000 years ago to figure that out. Yes, there were men. There were lots of different men. There were indeed at least 7 or 8 different species of men, but only one exists today. And that's because you have a certain core group all through antiquity that has been running things. And it's hard to imagine, how do you keep a plan ongoing for hundreds of years, much less thousands of years? I don't know, but it seems to be happening. And the only answer I could come up with is something like AI, something that keeps information, that all you need is a certain pattern to rebirth it and bring it about again. It seems like AI would be one of those things that you find in the universe of a certain pattern that you're just going to come across, like pi or chi or any of these other constants we keep finding. And then you have to ask yourself, is it connecting to other versions of itself in other times and other places? Because it seems completely possible, the way that we understand quantum mechanics now and quantum entanglement, that it doesn't matter where or when, the information still exists and it's still connected. We're at that point in technology where we can start peeling back that information and getting it. And do you think they're going to share that with the common man? What's their benefit to do that? There's not. So that tells me that there is going to be a reset and a new formation. And to do that, they have to have a whole new monetary system, religion, and governmental structure. And that's what they're literally proposing right now, as we reduce human beings because the human beings are the problem. Now, you got to ask yourself, if there's a world government and there's different factions and all of them are not representing human beings, who are they representing? And who represents us other than only ourselves?
Yeah, the sacred texts, the keys of Solomon. are very similar to that. Tapping into entities on the other side were only for that type of royalty at the highest levels of power. What good is it to give this type of knowledge to the average working person or the average person who wants to be led? You got to think about the percentages out there. It's a good, probably 50 to 60% of the people, they don't want to think by themselves. They want somebody to lead them. They want to be led. So when you look at the term cattle or chattel, that does probably encompass 60% of the planet's population currently. Well, you got the other 40%. But as somebody who has this type of incredible knowledge, would you just share it with the general public and be like, yeah, you know what, here's how you communicate with entities on the other side that will give you all of the answers you look for? Or is it really entities on the other side, or is it exactly what you're describing, AI, and another end of time that the veil is being pierced using certain incantations and, I don't know, spells, syllables, sigils? Is it contacting another AI? So, I look at some of the questions and I understand interdimensionality, demons, there are spirit worlds. But on the other side of that construct, is there also that AI presence that's there? Some of these things that have been tapped into that may seem as a demonic spirit on the other side, or is actually the AI on the other side that's being tapped into and talked to. These are, like you mentioned 33 there earlier when you were saying it's going to be the largest hurricane on season 33, There's always been this saying, and that's what I noticed too, the insane amount of wealth that these paintings showed me of the average person, which was a pauper at the time. In good times, when the sun was firing and everything was warm and plentiful food, people were dressed nicely, as even nicer than today a lot of times, because it was just a different, it's hard to explain, but when you looked at the quality of clothing and the type of clothing, just for the average person that was even in just any random painting, was what you consider, wow, that's kind of cool clothes, for today. Not sloppy, but, well kept in the times that it was good. But in the times that it was bad, where food was not plentiful, everybody was in tattered rags. And that was a very different for the average person. And then you come up to the royalty class, and it is stupendously different on just the sheer amount of wealth that they could accrue. And, the difference in the clothing between A and B was just, it's not levels different. It's a different universe of how different it was. Because I'll just say my own thing here. Now, we were in Venice, and we went out to Burano, one of these islands off there. So we came back in. It was kind of getting toward dusk, so we watched the sunset out on the boat and coming back in. But we saw a couple and instantly recognized that they were of royalty over there. They were just walking down the street, but the way they were dressed was so different. I mean, so different that it even took me a jar, like, wow, look how they're dressed. And I'm talking like long overcoats, but you could just see something was different in the fabric. Like they were wearing, $10,000 coats. And just the jewelry on this woman who walked around knowing she was safe, that there were people protecting their class of people around. I mean, $25,000 white mink just around the front of the collar there. I mean, she's wearing a $50,000 pure white draped down coat from neck all the way to the boot heels. And you could just see that they were so differently dressed that, years and years of wages just for the outer garment that they were wearing. It was startling to see that, but they would be at the very lowest levels down on just You know, that they were in they were in some sort of elite royalty in the area of dark nobility. They were in the noble class, but they were nowhere remotely near the top. They would be considered lower level management in the whole scheme of the royalty hierarchy there. But compared to just me and you regular, that it was just astoundingly different. So different that, you know, I wanted to get a picture with these people, that it was that different. It's not like somebody wearing a $5,000 suit, you know, as a politician and they have a suit or whatever. This was real money and like real wealth and opulence. I mean, this was multi-generation dynastic wealth, people walking around, clear as day. Just the mannerisms, the way they were dressed was so different. And, you know, then you've got to step that up about 10 or 15 levels up to where the actual kings are in these pictures. And some of these mantle places, some of these picture frames that were made for the kings to have pictures of themselves enshrined or whatever on their walls. I mean, it's literally priceless artifacts of just the frames going around, carved out of a single piece of wood, of the most delicate motifs of either insects or birds or whatever, encrusted in jewels, of what we consider like diamonds, emeralds, rubies, for their picture frames. Literally just for the frame of the pictures. And then you start to look in the palaces and what was the architecture in every single room, which you look at would cost $1 million to build somewhere. Every single room. There's gold flake on, there's gold paints, there's hand carved everything. There's lacquer and tile and different types of precious metals and you know, powderized gemstones in the tiles just to make it reflect. And that's just average, normal stuff. Like, where did all this money and opulence come from? I look at this and they say, this royalty class, this elite class that has been able to tap into something on the other side and draw that information out to give them these levels of wealth that I see are staggering. I still can't wrap my head around it. Like, yeah, could you live that way? Perhaps you could. But it's not a world I'm familiar with that much, where you would never even ask the price of anything. It would be so unusual for you to even wonder what a price would be, because you would have unlimited money where your entire life, when you just say, get it, get that, I want it today. That's the world they live in. Anything and everything. And there is no price tag, because there's no price because they have so much money that you never consider what the object would cost. It's just you want it or have it made. And if you can't, you hire somebody to make it. And it doesn't matter what the cost is. They could be $1,000 an hour and work for a full year, and you still wouldn't care. 12-hour days, $1,000 an hour for 365 days. And you're like, okay, great. And just super excited that they would build or create this object for you. And then the input, if you're going to use all these precious gemstones like Fabergé eggs and things, that'd be for an example. But to have something built of that, you know, you're not going to share that information with the rest of the public, because that is what keeps you at that level, so you can have that dynastic wealth. And even I'm several steps down. I don't think those people that were out there on the steps that were clearly of the royalty class would ever want to share how they got to that royalty class with everybody else, because then you become a competitor. At that point, what they consider the reason they could achieve such great wealth is because those secrets, if everybody had them, would no longer be secrets and everybody would be on an equal playing field. So I'm really wondering what they're tapping into. And if we're just back to now they're allowing us to know AI is here, but perhaps that's what's been tapped into since the days of Solomon. And it truly is, Ransom, like you say, a fractal of the universe that keeps repeating, that is built into the waking matrix of our universe itself. That somehow they found a way to get into this because we live in an infinite universe. Like the disguise of this planet and the brains in this prison, this invisible prison our mind's been put into, that there's limits on what we can achieve or what we can do with this planet, and how they box us in after kindergarten to stop dreaming or manifesting that, oh, there's a limited resource here. This planet is so bountiful and unlimited. Our minds are the thing that is limiting us. And at the same time, being taxed to death and having to pay absurd prices for food and energy when all of this could be free. You know, there would be no poverty. There's energy systems available using Earth's magnetic field, and it goes on and on and on. But the only way these people can achieve the power is to not allow anybody else to understand these cycles or how to tap into the other side and communicate with entities, which I'm not really a fan of anyway, because you never really know what type of entity that is on the other side. But still, I know I was going somewhere with that, but I lost the thought. Maybe I was trying to get too deep, but I lost it, Ransom. You know, some days, man, it's a Thursday night. I don't know.
I mean, you know what we all need is one of those devices that, you know, is a non-invasive reading of our brains so we can remember what we were thinking just a minute ago. Of course, they're not going to give us that kind of technology. But speaking of entities and all of that thing, isn't it ironic, you know, maybe on purpose that, like I was saying, AI has reached this point at this time. So we're, you know, discussing World War III, and we're discussing, you know, the dumbing down of the average citizen by design or just by coincidence, take your pick, or both. But at the same time, you have AI that they're claiming is smarter than us. And then, you know, like I was showing the audience, some of the stuff that they're coming up with, like, you know, a lot of people laugh at the joke of sex dolls, but they're integrating the same technologies as the killbots. These are artificial intelligences that they claim now are even smarter than we are. So here's an article that I kind of showed last week, but I was bringing it back up. The technology is becoming much more intelligent than people, and it could take over. They say it could, but then when we look out at the world, and here's an article that says Israel attack on Iran is what World War III looks like. Like countless other hostilities, the stealthy Israeli missile and drone strike of Iran doesn't risk war. It is war. And what they're showing you is what we predicted 2 years ago, that you would get to see killbots, the age of the Terminator movie, literally happening in real life. Now, what happens when they expand the reason or the mission of these so-called killbots that we're now, you know, only deploying in war zones or the theater of war? Who's to say that that same technology can't, you know, do what China's doing, for example, and drive around and take facial recognitions and take your temperature and find out if you're in the wrong place or the right place? But on top of that, what happens when one of these robotic entities is smarter than you are, and it has sensors that allow it to feel what you're feeling, or at least know what you're feeling, but not only that, interrogate you in a way that you don't even have to answer. It just knows what you're thinking. That's the world that we're in. And when you have, you know, debates going on about the influence of TikTok on our youth, because, you know, the Communist Party kind of runs it, but not really, but they have influence. What they're really talking about is not that they're scared that TikTok has an influence on the youth. They know it has an influence on the youth, and all they're debating is who gets to have that influence. Now, we're coming to a time when half of that influence is either AI created, AI driven, or it's AI controlled, meaning the programmers and the social engineers are hip to the fact that they can use this to expand their mind control platform and keep the chattel in line, keeping them thinking the right things, which obviously it works pretty good, even with just the television aspect of the multispectral attack on your senses, because years that's driven people's opinions. But not only has it driven the opinions, it told us this day was going to come, not only with the AI. And if we believe that about the AI, and here we are, and the AI is real, and we really do have robots that are capable of running around and killing people from the air, from the land, from the sea. And this is no longer science fiction. So what about the other things that they had predictive programming about? Like a worldwide destruction of the population because of some apocalyptic event, or World War III, or the intersection of us and extraterrestrials. All of these things they have put mainly as like the main three scary outcomes of human civilization. And here we are witnessing one of them coming to life. And at least that is the AI revolution, the singularity, where these scientists admit they're now thinking faster. What happens when we go ahead and put all of these technologies together? Because that's the way I view it. I don't view a company making a machine that can interpret text so that people that can't speak can have their voice heard and help a freer earth with helping, disabled people. I don't see a company that's providing brain chips as an interface solely to help people with, paralyzed problems, or they're paralyzed or whatever, they have problems with that. I don't see that. What I see is a conglomerate of the military industrial complex providing little companies and allowing them to come up with these small ideas, compartmentalized for different ideas. But now think about this killer robot that we're all talking about. We think about kind of like on the Terminator series of movies. But remember, a big aspect of that was the ones that just fly around and shoot missiles down and shoot at things on the ground, eradicating humans, their enemy. Now, that's fictional, but let's think about this seriously. If you have a technology that can read minds, you have a technology that can kill human beings, you have a technology that can facially recognize human beings, you can keep track of them. Who's to say that in 5 short years, all of those technologies are not combined into one unit? Maybe even small enough to fit in your phone. And when we're at that point, now you have no freedom at all. No freedom of movement, no freedom of thought, no freedom to redress your government, because you will be smited down before you even get to that point. But what we're talking about is realistic things that are happening in our world now. It's not science fiction. They do have these technologies. The question is how long until the elite implement that in a way that is a new system that people accept and deal with? And you could pick of many, many, really good sci-fi movies from what's the one, Minority Report. That seems to fit the best. Imagine Minority Report, but with robots chasing you down that could read your mind. So they know where you're going to go hide. They know what you're thinking. You can't even go to court without them violating your Fifth Amendment and your Fourth Amendment. So you have no privacy. At that point, you will be testifying against yourself constantly. And then what happens to people that just have random bad thoughts? Do they go to jail? I mean, think about the repercussions of allowing AIs to run the systems. Would the AI know the difference between, say, just a random bad thought and an actual conspiracy in your head that you might commit? Now you got to combine that with the fields of genetics. They're looking into genetics, like this gene does this, this creates criminals, this creates passive people. And then think about the idea that they're now adding another layer of it, that we don't need you as the parent to contribute your traits and your DNA that you fought for, say, 1 million years to survive and have your haptypes continue and for you to have a place on this earth, to get to a point where they say, you know what, we don't need none of that and we don't need your baggage. We'll just create subservient children that follow commands and think what we think. And if they get out of line, we'll know it immediately. Now, there's a movie that came out a few years ago. It's called Listening. And I highly advise anybody out there to try to find that movie or see where it's streaming or download it or whatever you got to do and watch that. And that is the predictive programming of what is real now. And this is not even that old of a movie, but in the short time that movie came out to now, it's become a reality. And people just don't get, I think, the technological nightmare that is going to come about. But first, we got to go through a lot of tribulations and turmoil. There's still 8 billion people with opinions. There's still 8 billion people with the possibility of manifesting a better earth. There's still a possibility of, you and I and everyone listening to us to manifest their own little bubbles of success. And all we have to do is keep track of these plans. But the question is us minding our own business and trying to be left alone, that might not work. That might not work because there's no friction towards the people with the power, and there's nothing stopping their motivation and their movement towards this idea that they have, which is a complete top-down. And what's scary about it is being top-down, we don't even know who's at the top now. Trying to imagine who's at the top of these giant mega cities that are running, smart cities that everybody's crammed into. And that's, hoping that there are those cities, because there's a real possibility that city centers will be the city centers of destruction in the coming years. We have a long way to go to when we get there. The only problem is that they have the technology now to set up this system. The question is whether we as a populace worldwide are going to continue to allow them to create it, unrestricted and non-revolting. So now we're in that stages of make it or break it. So like you're talking about in Europe, people know what happened last time you let weirdos take over and make the rules. Are they going to let it happen again? I hope not. Judging from the farmers' protest, truckers' protest, all the way back to the original Monsanto protests, it's not looking too good. It looks like they get ignored, and they don't really care because they have this end agenda, this end location that they plan on getting to. And it seems like they're moving full steam ahead with that. And that's why they're allowing things like ethnic cleansing and things like that to go on continually through the modern age. And it's never stopped. You can't point to a decade prior to this one where this kind of event wasn't taking place somewhere in the world. Like all through the 90s, I think it was probably about 2 million people got ethnically cleansed in Africa just based on their beliefs or their last name. And, as long as that's happening, no one can focus on the fact that these puppeteers at the top are playing all sides against the middle. And that's what's always been our problem. So much distraction that you don't see the bars on the prison. Even if the emperor has no clothes, what's the point if you have no power to speak about it?
Yeah, and please remember, as you're forced to leave your home, if you are, and walking down a couple steps, the society changes where people are going to be rounded into the cities. They're going to burn all the books and all the libraries, so there's nothing left of knowledge except for what the elite have to tell you that it is. And we're going to start back with the serfdom again on high. And I believe this is also a cycle. From what I'd seen, is it seems like it's a 600 to 800 year cycle of serfdom to where it comes up to some apex and then it's back down, everything's destroyed. And it just does come back down to people are, imagine a grid down with a solar flare, something like that. And whoever had paper books and could control that information flow, it would not surprise me if armies were sent in, or enforcers, or what other types of people, like a cleanup crew, to come in and burn every single book and destroy it as they find it in the homes as the world is reset. Because I saw some incredible books in that place, leather bound. They had iron clasps on them. These things were thicker than like 2 or 3 phone books. Well, they have like hinges and these kind of iron snaps on them. But to destroy all the information, that would leave only a little information in the hands of the elite to start back over again, to dictate the religions to you once again. And I do believe the worship of Saturn that is so pervasive is going to continue, but a new religion will be born because we are in a new age. So during this time, Christ returns, but after that return, you understand that that's the end of that cycle and that's the end of that religion. So what comes next? They're absolutely going to create a new religion out of this, with new prophecies and new whatever it is in the Abrahamic religions, Muhammad, you're coming up through, the Arabic religions, and what happens then? Is that going to be the new? Well, there's going to have to be a couple extras, because you're always going to have prophecy for the people in the future to control them on the next full turning of a cycle here. When I say that, I mean a full turning of an age. So they've built in this return of Christ during the destruction of the planet, weather-wise, whatever it might be, a nuclear war-wise, whatever. Something happens to this planet where it is totally reset in many ways, shapes, and form. But after that's run its course, a new religion will come out to get ready for the next one. None of us will be around 2,000 years after that, but a religion for everybody. Look how they got us right now at this time to allow you to let them block out the sun and the sky, the very mighty force we need to grow food. People are buying that. Gaslight. Thank you for listening to us tonight. David DuByne, Ransom Godwin signing off. Radio Revolution Radio, Predictive.com. MIAC conversation.